take a look at what is music theory. How would I define music theory? Well, music theory is basically understanding how music works. And to do that, we observe the relationship between notes. There are a number of types of relationships between notes, which we will, of course, talk about right now. The distance between notes is one of them, which is intervals, which we'll talk more about. And then we got the sound of notes being played together. That's your harmony. Voicing of notes from left to right, that's our melody. And the timing of notes between each other, which is your rhythm. So obviously I can have, let's get a piano up in here. So obviously I can have the distance between notes. Oh, I don't have this on. Distance between notes, you'll hear it in a second. The distance between notes, this is called an interval. And then you do have the sound of notes being played together. So here's our intervals. So they're all intervals. Intervals can be really far apart. They can be really close together. And then we do have the basically the timing of notes, which is your rhythm. You know, I was just playing one note, but I was playing in a repetitive pattern over time. So that is our rhythm. And we're going to talk more about these in detail right now. Okay, we're going to be talking about intervals. So interval is the distance between pitches, and intervals can be read harmonic, up and down, or melodic, left and right. So whenever you have notes that are up and down, they're being played at the same time, right? That goes perfectly with what I just said about harmony, and then you can go from left to right as well. Well, intervals is the same thing. In fact, looking at the sheet, I actually made a special practice sheet for this lesson. You can find in the description, but we're going to take a look at it together right now. So as you can see right here, we're just looking at these first two measures here. We have notes from left to right. See that? We got, let me get a pen here. So you got left, you got right, and the notes run from left to right. Well, that anytime you observe that, you're talking about some kind of melody. Whether it be the main melody, usually the melody is on the top of the piece. So like if you have Jingle Bells, for example, which I always use for this example because it's so good. So, you know, you have your melody up here. And often melody is the part of the piece that you're going to be humming to yourself and thinking about. And then harmony is the background chords to it. So when you have this sort of thing, you know, taking our melody of Jingle Bells, these notes all have a relationship to one another in terms of intervals. So here, obviously, I have between the first two real notes, you know, that's up a third. Those are, you know, 3 apart, 1, 2, 3. And then between those two, you know, that's 5. So taking a look at our example here again, that our intervals are really here, here. I'm actually not going to circle them all because I do want you to do the assignment. But as you can see, they are, you're basically going from note to note, looking at the distance between each. Actually, the distance between this F and the G here. By the way, intervals are signified basically by number. So you first of all have a unison. So if, say I have F, and then a friend of mine on another piano plays F. Well, we call it unison, and you've probably heard that saying before, singing in unison. That means you and your friends or whoever are singing the same thing at the same time. And then what they tend to do is, after that, they go in order, number order. So second is the next one. So if you have a note in the next note, that's a second. You skip one, that's a third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth. Well, you've probably, if you've taken piano lessons before, you probably recognize that your teacher may have said that this is called an octave. Well, think about it. Oct, right? Octave. Think about octopus. The oct word means 8. So an octave is an interval based on 8 notes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, just like that. So all these intervals here in our example are all seconds so far. You know, you have from F to G, so that's a second, 1, 2. And you have from G to A, that's a second as well, G, A. So all seconds. Now for the assignment, you don't have to write them in, but I'm just kind of showing you that intervals are all signified by a certain number. Let's take this B to this E, for example. So the B is right here. The E is right here. Actually, this view is better. B, E right here. And then all you do is you count the note you started on, count the notes in between to the ending note. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Therefore, that interval is a fourth. So that's how you do it. You just count the notes on the outer edges and then the notes in between, and that gives you your intervals. Okay, harmony. Harmony is the relationship of notes being played at the same time, as I mentioned. We're actually going to take a look at a specific example. Harmony is often illustrated in terms of chords. So let's take a look here at an example that we have. So we have this notes being played at the same time. Let me get this a little larger so we can see what is happening. So over here, we have like an F and an A being played at the same time. So right away, if it's being played at the same time, you know that that's a harmony. One thing I want to mention is that you can also combine, because the left hand's being played at the same time as the right hand, you can combine the two, and actually the whole thing is harmony between the right hand and the left hand. So if I play all those notes at the same time, as you should, you'll get something like this, although there's hand crossing going on right here. You know, if I play all those notes, let's show you here, at the same time, as you can hear, it sounds kind of like a chord. A chord, by the way, as we'll get to more later in the lesson, is just basically when you stack notes evenly like that. You're playing more than 2 notes at a time. That is technically a chord. So remember, harmony up and down, and then melody left to right. Very, very important you understand that. All right, let's move on to the next thing. Okay, I want to quickly elaborate on melody using this same example we were looking at. So if this part was the harmony, right, up and down, in vertical columns, well, the rows from left to right are the melody. So, you know, this is the melody because all these notes are happening just one note at a time. Now, obviously, they are being played along with the harmony, too, but you can read them from left to right. That is the melody, and that's what a melody will look like in an actual piece of music. Okay, now we're going to talk about keys and key signatures, also very, very important in music. So let's take a look. A key tells you the notes commonly found in a piece of music. Keys have a number of sharps or flats, but not both. So going to our keyboard here, so say I have the key of C, which is basically, key of C has 0 sharps, 0 flats. So that means you can expect to see a lot of these types of notes, a lot of the white keys, because there's no sharps or flats to be found. So in the key of C, the tonic, which means the starting note, is C, and the notes in between are D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. That gives you the layout of what notes you're going to be using in a piece of music. Now, can you use any sharps or flats like in the middle of a piece? Well, sure, but they aren't part of the key. They are actually using notes outside of the key, just like that. Now, the key of G, for example, like I mentioned, keys can have 0 sharps, 0 flats. They can have a certain amount of sharps, up to 7, and a certain amount of flats, also up to 7. Now, like so the key of G, for example, this time has an F sharp in it, and that's just one of the ways you define the key of G. It has an F sharp in it, and the tonic, meaning the starting and ending note, are both G. So that's some ways you can tell what key you're in. You look for the tonic, which is like the beginning and ending notes, and then any sharps or flats. So let's take a look at our example here once again. A key is designated by what we call the key signature right here. Now, we're not going to go into all the key signatures and how to memorize those. I've made lessons on that already. I'll try to make sure to link you to a description, link you to in the description when you come across those. But a key signature are just the sharps or flats that appear in the beginning of a piece that tell you what notes are sharp or flat throughout the whole thing. And that goes along with the key, right? Because if you had like the key of G, like I mentioned, you'd expect an F sharp in the key signature. In this case, this happens to be, it's a little tricky. It happens to be in C minor, which happens to have these three flats, B flat, E flat, and A flat. Let me show you right here. So B flat, E flat, and A flat. Those three flats. Every other note is a normal, standard, regular, natural note. So in the key of C minor, what are some things, how will we know it's in C minor? Well, the tonic, right, the beginning and ending note, will be C, like that. And in between, we're just going to go up. But every time we hit a B, E, or A, it's going to be flat instead of the regular note. So remember that a key just tells you what notes are sharp to flat. Don't try to wrap your head too much if you don't know your keys already in memorizing every key right now. Just understand that a key tells you what notes you can expect throughout a piece, and the key signature is actually the physical representation in the beginning of a piece telling you what key basically you're playing in and what sharps or flats you could find. Sforzando, so you hit it suddenly and then you back off the sound. Okay, next we're going to talk about scales. I would define a scale. A scale is when you put all the notes in a key, starting from the tonic to the other tonic, and all the notes in between. So far, actually, by showing you how keys work, I've already shown you quite a few scales. So when I played C and all the notes in between for the key of C, that's the C scale. And that's one of the reasons we learn our scales, because it helps you understand the visual representation of where the sharps and flats are. Obviously, in the key of C, you don't need to worry about it. In the key of G, I actually played the G scale for you already, because you play all of the notes basically starting from the tonic, ending on the tonic, and all the notes in between, including any sharps or flats you may have. Like the key of C minor, the C minor scale was that, with the appropriate flats where they need to be. So don't skimp out on your scales, because your scales actually, if you're interested in theory, which you should be, because it's really important whether you want to compose or not, you should become familiar with your scales, because then you'll know, like that, what sharps or flats visually on the piano there are in a key. For example, the key of E, right? I haven't even talked about that one yet, but because I've played my scales about 1,000,000 times, I know that there's 4 sharps in here, and they are located, right there. So playing the scale is really, really, really important. In fact, if you play a piece in a new key, I recommend playing the scale first. It really, really helps. Okay, so chords. I mentioned a little bit about chords earlier. A chord is when you play 2 or more notes at the same time. So let's take a look here. So a chord on the piano will obviously look like this. There's a C chord, there's an F chord, there's a G chord, and so forth, all chords. Now, sometimes you can have a chord with only 2 notes, but that's not really a specific type of chord. That's just that you're leaving out one of the notes in the other types of chords we have. One of the types is called a triad, which is a 3-note chord, 1, 2, and 3. Sometimes some of the notes are doubled, like you'll see C, E, G, and then C all play at the same time, and you may be thinking, well, that's not a triad. Well, yes, it is. It's 3 individual notes. If any of the notes are repeated, it is still technically a triad. And as you may surmise, there are many, many types of chords. And every chord has a different type of sound, by the way. So there's major chords, happy, minor chords, sad, diminished chords, scary, augmented chords, mysterious, I would say. So there's and you could fit these into the pieces based on what kind of mood you are going for. So if a composer is writing a piece, they want to sound sad, first of all, they'll write it in a minor key. I should have mentioned there are major keys and minor keys. The minor keys sound sadder and use mostly minor chords. So it makes sense. You're going for something sad, use minor. If you're doing an upbeat, happy song, use major. Okay, some of the other types of chords that I want to mention just briefly, this isn't a lesson just on chords. They are your triads, obviously, then you have your sevenths, your extended chords, suspended chords, and of course there are plenty more than that, especially as you get into jazz. There will be complicated chords. But all you need to know today is that a chord is really when you're playing two or more notes at being played at the same time. Now, chords and harmony can be used interchangeably. Like I said, chords are really a way to describe harmony. You know, instead of just saying, okay, there's harmony going on there. Well, what kind of harmony? Well, an F minor triad harmony, that's what. So that's just a way, you know, to further describe the harmony going on. Next, we're going to be talking about how to build chords on a scale, because that will tell us what chords we can have in any given key. What is a key again? Think about it. A key is basically the notes that you can typically find throughout a piece of music. So if there's no sharps, no flats, that's the key of C. That you can have a certain number of sharps up to 7, certain number of flats up to 7. But let's talk about, let me show you actually a scale on the piano first. So there's our scale, right? So we have 8 notes total, 7 individual notes. C, D, E, F, G, A, B is our 7th. Well, on each of those notes, if you evenly stack notes on each of them, like a snowman, you can build some triads on each note. Now I'm going to show you what this looks like in a second. We'll see if it does anything wonky, though. Okay, so we still have the scale in place, right? We still have C, D, E, F, G. It's all the bottom notes of these chords, A, B, and C. But now I've stacked triads on each of them. So instead of this, whoops, it's more like this. Just like that. So 1 chord, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then we're not going to call this chord 8 because it's just the same as the first chord we did. So that is basically the same chord over and over again. Okay, let's take a look here. So you can see here that we can label the chords 1 through 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8, just like that. So 8 chords, although I should just write 1, like I said. Shame on me for not doing that. Okay, so now we basically have 7 chords that we can use in a piece. Now this is true. You can borrow chords from other keys, but we're not going to talk about that right now. These are what we call diatonic chords, which means they are chords that exist in a key, which is really important in discussing our next topic, which should be chord progressions. A chord progression is a pattern of chords used in a piece of music. You can take the chords we built and make a pattern out of them. The most common chord progressions are the primary chords. Now, these are Roman numerals, but this is 1, 4, and 5. Now, it's very common for chords to be written in Roman numerals, and if the Roman numeral is capital, it signifies a major chord. If it's lowercase, it signifies a minor chord. So let's take a look at what we have here in our example again. So what did I mention in the slide? Which ones were the most important? Which ones were known as the primary chords? Well, let's circle them. 1, 4, 5, and they often go back to 1. Well, now let me ignore all the other chords in between, and let me just play the chords that are squared in this case. I meant to circle them, but here we go. So 1, 4, 5, 1. And hey, we just played our first chord progression. So that's all you have to know, is that a chord progression is a set pattern of chords that's usually repeated many times throughout a piece. You can use more than one chord progression per piece, but the chord progression really helps set the overall harmonic sound of the piece. And again, think if you ever build chord progressions yourself, think about whether the chords are major or minor in terms of what chords you want to use, right? So all of these happen to be major. But say you wanted a more melancholy sound. My computer, hold on. But say you wanted a more melancholy sound, so maybe instead of 1, 4, 5, 1, which are all major chords, maybe I'll do 1, 2, which has a minor kind of sound to it, right? 2, 5, 1. So you can mess around with the chord progressions a bit, but just know that the most common chord progression in all of music is what? The primary chords, 1, 4, 5, and then back to 1 usually. Okay, if you like today's introduction to theory and you're thinking, you know, I kind of get it, but I really want some more practice, or maybe you get it really solid and you really want to learn more about theory than ever before, well, you want to go to my website, pianolessonsontheweb.com. I have links in the description for you of all my theory classes that you can take. I would start with Music Theory Level 1 if you're brand new. A great review of what we talked about today. But it also is really helpful because not only is it just videos like you're seeing now, there's also included assignments and worksheets and things really to help you practice each of the individual things that we talked about today. So make sure you check out the link in the description for that and use code YouTube to get an additional 15% off any order of courses.